The defending champs let one slip away in Game 1 of the Stanley Cup Final. Welcome to Stanley Cupdate for Thursday, June 5th, 2025. Vic Morren, along with my partner in crime on this podcast, Neil Smith. And speaking of crime, did the Oilers steal one in Game 1?
They sure did, because the record for Paul Maurice since taking over the Florida Panthers in 22-23 is a remarkable 31-0 in playoff games if they're leading after either period, either the first or the second. They were 31-0. So last night was the first time that the Panthers had, you could say, blown a lead, but lost the lead, and they were up 3-1, and that's a pretty good lead, even though I felt that the Oilers were playing pretty well. It was just the way the game went that allowed Florida to take what I thought was a commanding 3-1 lead.
I thought it was a fascinating game in a lot of respects, with the adjusting that went on after each period. And I think Henrik Lundqvist touched on it very well. And it's certainly something that you have spoken about constantly in between games. But the in-game adjustments for both teams in this, because you could see the ebbs and flows in the way that this game went, that these teams are familiar with each other. There were no secrets after playing 7 games last year, and it was like a chess match in a lot of ways.
Yeah, and having 6 days in between games so that you could watch reams and reams and reams of video about the opponent and really break it down. The in-game adjustments were really, really good for both teams.
Before we get into it a little bit deeper, I had come across something from geotagged X data and fan hashtags about the rooting interest in these finals. And you have to wonder, do you buy into the Panthers being the villain mindset? Because 42 out of the 50 states in the U.S. and all 10 of the Canadian provinces that were surveyed want the Oilers to win this Stanley Cup Final.
Well, I believe it about the Canadian provinces because I was in Canada when the Edmonton Oilers were trying to win their first Stanley Cup. And, of course, I had been living on Long Island, so I had been with the Islanders a couple of years earlier. So I still wanted Al Arbor and the Islanders to win. But everybody in Toronto watching the game in the bars and everywhere were cheering for the Oilers to win. And what I think it is, Vic, in this situation is they're already tired of the Panthers. I mean, they've been in the final now 2 years in a row. Now It's a third. They're like, okay, it's somebody else's turn. Let's see somebody new win. You know, I that's really what I think goes on with the human beings, is that they want to change. They want to see somebody new win it, and not just the same old, same old. So I believe that geotagging, that those were probably true, that the 10 Canadian provinces all were cheering in large measure for the Oilers, although I don't think that southern Alberta would be cheering for the Oilers, being Calgary. And I do think that, down in the southern states of the United States, everybody would be cheering for Florida, except on the intercoast Gulf of Mexico, Tampa Bay, Sarasota area. I don't think they'd be cheering for the Panthers.
But still, Florida was one of those states that is favoring the Panthers. So still enough favoritism there. Of course, the state of Florida has been represented in the last 6 Stanley Cup finals. So let's start to get into this a little bit. The injury news right at the top. Zach Hyman revealed that he had dislocated his right wrist, also suffered torn ligaments on the hit from Mason Marchment in Game 4 of the Western Conference Final. And you remember after Game 7 last year, when everybody was down in the locker room and he gave an impassioned speech to his club promising that they would be back, and indeed they are. Other lineup moves, Connor Brown in for Edmonton. He was listed as a game-time decision after being injured in the Dallas series. And A.J. Greer, out for the Florida Panthers, replaced by Jesper Boqvist. But let's quickly just go back to Hyman and how much he has meant to that club, particularly over the last several years.
No, he has been great. And Ken Holland signed him. He had been playing in Toronto, and people thought he way overpaid him. And yet he has been spectacular for them and a very important guy. And probably, once you get past McDavid and Draisaitl, and then you look down a little bit further, there's Zach Hyman as probably the third star on the team. I mean, one could argue it's Nugent Hopkins. One could argue it's Bouchard. One could argue a lot of players. But I think that it's Zach Hyman that makes it almost a trio of McDavid, Draisaitl, and then Zach Hyman.
Over the years, at the start of Stanley Cup Finals, we've seen somewhat of a feeling out process due to lack of familiarity between the opponents because they only see each other twice a year. But given the history of these clubs going back to last year, very little feeling out process in that first period because Edmonton comes out. And one of the things that I believe they're going to have to do, and we talked about it in our Cup Final preview with Craig Button, is they're going to have to succeed at some of the things that the Panthers do really well. And on the first goal of the game, they win a puck battle in the Florida end. Walman takes a shot, puck is on edge, Bobrovsky has a hard time handling it. Kapanen gets the first rebound and then second rebound to Leon Draisaitl. 1-0 after 66 seconds.
In my view, in watching that a couple of times, I thought that Forsling lost Draisaitl.
Yeah.
He picked him up at first, and then he moved towards the net and got sort of taken out by another Oiler who was falling through. It might have been Evander Kane. I'm not sure who it was. And that got Forsling's attention off of Draisaitl, who came in and put the rebound in. Draisaitl has a great awareness of his two line mates are in there digging hard. He comes late to pick up the garbage, as Brian Boucher said on the telecast. I don't think in any means it was garbage, but I know exactly what he meant.
He has that brilliance almost in a different way than Mike Bossy, but somewhat similar in that they're able to find these dead spots on the ice where defenders leave their attention to them just long enough that they can get exploited.
They probably are doing this the entire game long, but the only time we talk about it or remember it is when they actually score.
Right.
So they probably themselves are going, okay, I hope it bounces out now. It doesn't. I hope it bounces out now. It doesn't. But they try that over and over again during the entire game, and that's how we call it puck luck. We call it, knowing where to go. But they probably do that over and over again all game long, and when it works, it's huge.
The other superstar on the Oilers, I thought kind of bookended the game because we heard a lot from him early. We heard a lot from him late, not too much in the middle. But this was a 200-foot example of Connor McDavid because about 5.5 minutes into the first period, great back check, getting around Eetu Luostarinen to compromise a really good attempt by Sam Bennett, who we're going to hear from shortly. And that was forced by an Evan Bouchard turnover at the Florida blue line. And then with Corey Perry in the penalty box for the first of two times during the first period, McDavid hits the crossbar. Could have made the score 2-0. And I had raised the possibility that we might see more of McDavid in terms of penalty killing to put that speed fear in the Panthers. And he did play 1:38 of the 3:41 of the time that the Oilers were shorthanded in game one.
Yeah, and you're right. I mean, you did mention that when we were on with Craig Button, and I was saying that I didn't think you'd want him out there for fear of having to block shots. But good on you for thinking about that and saying maybe they should try that because his speed could keep the Panthers back on their heels. And sure enough, you were right.
We'll see if that holds up during the course of the rest of the series, but we did see it in game one, and the Panthers only had 2 power play opportunities. At 10:49, Panthers tie the game, and Bennett falls over Kulak's stick, bumps Skinner. Verhaeghe's shot hits Bennett and goes in to tie the game at 1. So let's break this up into 2 parts here. What did you think of the call, and then what did you think of the challenge?
Well, first of all, what happened was Kulak's leg knocked out Bennett's leg. Kulak's leg went and at the last minute. There were two defensemen in front of the net there.
Yeah, Wallman was the other one.
Yeah, Wallman had more contact with Bennett than Kulak. But it was Kulak's leg that knocked out Bennett's leg.
So let me stop you there and ask you, who's responsible there? Because was it the action of Kulak that forced Bennett to fall backwards? Did he move his leg? Or if Bennett falls over Kulak's leg, does the onus then lay at the lap of Bennett?
Well, if you get your foot kicked out, you're not supposed to be able to control which way you fall.
Did you think he got his foot kicked out, or did he just fall back?
No, I thought his leg got knocked out. I thought the right call was his leg got knocked out by Kulak. And the way they call penalties in today's NHL, it doesn't really matter. He made contact with the back of his leg. If Bennett embellished it and fell backwards purposely into the goalie, that doesn't matter. There are penalties going on all over the ice all game long where guys didn't mean to do something, but they still get penalized for it. You know, you go to poke check somebody and the blade of your stick slips under his skate and he falls, you get a tripping penalty. So in this case, Kulak's leg hit Bennett in the back of the leg. Bennett fell backwards, and the puck almost went in as soon as he fell backwards. It wasn't like he was there for very long. I thought the challenge was ill-advised. I thought the challenge by Knobloch was probably as ill-advised as Jim Hiller's in the LA series with Edmonton.
Except it doesn't get magnified as much because this happened in the first period as opposed to the third period. And Edmonton had the lead at the time. Now it's 1-1. Now they're shorthanded. Great pass by Nate Schmidt to Brad Marchand at 12:30. And it's 2-1 Panthers in a period that they are getting outplayed for the most part up to that point.
Right, but here's the thing. Knobloch calls for a review. The review comes back negative. They then have to go on the penalty kill. Instead of it being 1-0 for a successful review, it's 1-1 and turns to 2-1 because of the ill-advised review. So had this game ended victorious for the Panthers, I think we'd all be talking about Knobloch's challenge and unsuccessful challenge. But because they ended up winning, he gets off the hook. And I'll bet you he knows that himself. He's probably sitting in the coach's room after going, oh, thank God we won, because had we not won, the scrutiny would have all been on him and his challenge.
Overall, I like the Oilers' first period. They had a 14-7 edge in shots. They had 25 attempts at the Florida net. But 2 minutes into the second period, Verhaeghe with a little outlet to Nate Schmidt again, who comes down, hits Sam Bennett, and it's 3-1. And you get the feeling that the Panthers are on a roll, that they're going to continue this. They're going to put pressure on the Oilers, and they're going to quickly grab home ice advantage in this series.
Oh, you absolutely think that, because Bennett now is up to 12 goals in the playoffs, leading everybody. But if I can jump ahead on you for a second, I mean, what happened next was the worst thing for the Florida Panthers. What you're going to talk about next, because that's that next goal scored by Arvidsson that breathes life back into the Oilers and makes it 3-2. And the reason I say it's the worst thing that can happen, you know, McDavid and Draisaitl and those guys are going to get their chances. They're going to get their points. But when you allow the third or fourth line for Edmonton to start putting it in the net, that's when you know you've got trouble.
And one of the things that we had seen as this game went on were the adjustments that were made and center ice being choked off and the layering that Craig Button had spoken about. But nonetheless, this goal comes off the rush and from the bottom six, no less.
Right, and that's the whole point. And Bobrovsky was completely screened on Arvidsson's shot. He didn't even see it until it was going over his arm. I'll guarantee you that the Panthers are talking about this, is that we've got to make sure that the bottom six don't get these opportunities and are able to put it in the net, because that's what's going to kill the Panthers.
I thought Podkolzin was very visible in this game. I thought a lot of the small things that took place over the course of the evening at different points, different places on the ice. I thought Podkolzin had an outstanding game. I thought Evander Kane laid a couple of absolutely blow-up hits. One of them coming on Aaron Ekblad fairly early in the game. Then he had a couple of others. So overall, the Oilers' physicality matched up very well with their counterparts in Florida.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, there was no problem there for the Oilers. If anybody thought that was going to be a problem for the Oilers, I think they proved last night it's not going to be.
So one of the areas that we also looked at was the goaltending in our finals preview breakdown, and the head-to-head between Sergei Bobrovsky and Stu Skinner. The 11-minute mark, he stops Barkov, Schmidt, and Luostarinen literally in succession, and then later on Sam Bennett, Anton Lundell, and Luostarinen again. And as this game went on, I thought Skinner got better and better.
Yeah, I mean, you worried at first when it was 3-1 that those 3 goals came pretty quickly. I mean, they're 22 minutes into the game and Skinner's let 3 goals in. Yep. Not let them in. I hate when people say that because he didn't let them in. I mean, 3
Unlike
goals got by him. Huh?
Unlike 8 shots.
Yes, and so 3 pucks had gone past him, and you start to think, which Skinner are we going to get tonight? But as you said, by the 11-minute mark of that same period, he'd made some really big saves.
As we'd mentioned just a couple of minutes ago, we talked about Florida really choking off the zone entries in the second period, and the second period shots were 17-8 for the Panthers. And I thought at this point, if the Oilers were going to win or make a push at this game, they were going to have to win this game below the goal line. As we said, basically having to win Florida's style of play, or at least play straight up with them.
Yeah, no, true enough. That's exactly it.
Third period, Luostarinen misses from close in on a backhand about 3 minutes in. And then I thought the Panthers were starting to give their blue line up a little bit, not standing up quite as much. 6:33, Oilers gain the offensive zone. Crafty play by McDavid, and he winds up setting up Mattias Ekholm. Nifty backhand pass, hits Ekholm in the left circle. It's 3-3, and another goal off the rush.
Yeah, and they're starting to come on stronger and stronger. Something in the locker room between the second and third was in the water for the Oilers.
Well, you think about it. Florida had to make the adjustment after the first period. Edmonton had to make the adjustment after the second period. And Vander Kane had a close-in chance with 5:45 left. Podkolzin got stopped from in close with 2:45 left by Bobrovsky. Shots on goal of 14-2 in the third. And Edmonton really had it going on late in that game.
They sure did. As I said, there was something went on between the second and third, and Edmonton was a different team in the third, certainly than they'd been in the second.
But at the start of overtime, Stu Skinner had to stop Reinhart the first 19 seconds, and Florida had 3 shots, like in the first 2 minutes of the overtime after having only 2 in the entire third period. And another save by Skinner from the right circle, glove save, which looked like he was almost partially screened on that. And Kasperi Kapanen hit the post. Great solo effort at the 7-minute mark. Bobrovsky also had to come up big on Trent Frederick. Also stopped Evan Bouchard late in the overtime. But then the dagger. Tomas Nosek, who didn't play a lot in this game, but you see more fourth-line players that start to get ice time as games get deeper into overtime because their legs are fresher. But he's forced into throwing the puck over the glass, into the stands, delay of game penalty. And one of the things that was pointed out about the Panthers' penalty killing was how patient they were in the Oilers' earlier attempts. And after the first minute of this power play at the end of the first overtime, leading up to the goal, boy, there was a lot of scrambling going on.
Yeah, and you know what? This is the penalty I hate the most that's on the books. I've said it over and over and over again. I hate this penalty. Imagine playing in a Stanley Cup Final and one team wins because somebody accidentally put the puck over the glass. Not because you tripped somebody, not because you took away a scoring chance, not because you did anything egregious, but it happened to come off your stick wrong and it went over the glass. And for that, your team loses a Stanley Cup final game. I just hate that penalty. Nobody puts the puck over the glass on purpose. And if they do, the referee should see it and call it. But instead, we got this stupid penalty where if it accidentally goes over, you're in deep crap because you're trying to kill a penalty now.
The entire idea of it was to make it black and white and take the decision-making process out of the hands of the officials.
And I know that when we had Dave Jackson on here, he said he likes it. He likes that it takes away any discretion from the referee, which I was surprised at because I would think the referees would want a little bit of discretion. But I just find this a crappy penalty. I mean, think about it. If you trip a guy on a scoring chance, it's the same penalty as if you put the puck over the glass in your own zone. If you elbow a guy, if you slash him on the hands, all these things are the same penalty as if you accidentally put the puck over the glass. I've been on this diatribe before. I don't like it, and this proved my point because the Florida Panthers are now down 1-0 based on a power play in overtime because Florida put the puck over the glass.
And on that power play, Perry, deft little move, get the puck to McDavid. McDavid finds Draisaitl. And one of the things you got to love about Leon Draisaitl is how low he gets to optimize his leverage on the puck. And we've talked about the one-time specialists in the NHL, Nikita Kucherov, Steven Stamkos, of course, Alex Ovechkin. But you got to put Leon Draisaitl right up there with them because he is just money from that spot.
And that's why he won the Rocket Richard Trophy this year, because he is money and does score goals like a power forward. He's an amazing goal scorer. When you think about where he's come from in his career, from being a guy at one time they sent to the minors in his first year. They had him down in the minors for a little while. Everybody knew that he was going to be a power forward, a power center, almost like a Barkov as far as a big man, powerful. Barkov, of course, having just won the Selke Trophy again, is more of a defensive specialist. You're right. Draisaitl gets down low and gets that leverage on the puck and is amazing.
Game 2 of this series will be on Friday, 8 o'clock Eastern on TNT. And Neil and I will preview that on our show on Friday. But kind of as a precursor to that, I came out of game 1 believing that of the two teams, I still think Edmonton has to make more adjustment to their game than Florida. I believe Florida was more a victim of some self-inflicted wounds by giving up the blue line, kind of getting away from their game in the third period. And I believe Edmonton is still going to have to force the issue more and play as much in the Florida end as possible, play below the goal line, win 50-50 battles. And as I've said, I think twice already, they have to beat the Panthers at their own game.
I would agree with that only because the Panthers are this is their third time in a row going to the final. I know it's Edmonton's second time in a row, but I think that last night, this game 1 was, you don't come out of this game having watched it saying clearly one team's better than the other.
Correct.
You come out of this game going, well, Florida let one slip away and they had it. They could have grabbed home ice. They weren't able to do it, but I don't think they're that shook up about it. It's not like you go like, oh my God, what did we just see last night?
There's always something to be said about body language. And with the Panthers, they went down 2-0 to the Maple Leafs and were down 2 goals in game 3 of that series. So as we've mentioned during the course of the playoffs, this is a very professional unit, and this is just another obstacle in the way of where they intend to get to by series end.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think that they're bothered by last night, other than they're not going to let one more slip away on them. They're going to be more cognizant. I don't know how more cognizant you can be than 31 straight, but they're going to be more cognizant of holding leads.
Edmonton is going to have to be better, and I think they know that.
Yeah, well, they do. And Florida's got to be better. They both got to be better. I think this is one of the times when both teams will make adjustments because it was an overtime win. So I think they're both going to adjust to where their game needs to improve.
Even though the Panthers didn't win game one, their AHL affiliate, the Charlotte Checkers, are having some success. And they're in the Calder Cup Final. They will play either the Abbotsford Canucks or the Texas Stars. They advanced in a sweep in their semifinal series. This is the first time since 2008 that both an NHL and their AHL affiliate were in the final. The Pittsburgh Penguins and the Wilkes-Barre Scranton Penguins both lost that year. The last time both won was in 95 when the Devils and the Albany River Rats captured their respective titles. The other instances coming in 76-77 when the Canadiens and the Nova Scotia Voyageurs were both triumphant, winning the Stanley Cup. And
That's great history. I love that stuff. That's great. Of course, the Devils winning it in 95 was the lockout year. They only played a 48-game schedule. I think that the American Hockey League, however, played a full slate of games.
Correct. Guess how many head coaching openings there are now?
None.
Correct. Because on Wednesday, the Pittsburgh Penguins hired Dan Muse as their head coach. He was a former assistant with Peter Laviolette in New York. He broke in with Nashville in 2017, overseeing the penalty killing unit, and assumed a similar role in New York when he joined the Rangers in 2023. And then on Thursday, Marco Sturm hired as the Bruins head coach. And that was an extensive search that included the interim, Joe Sacco, Mitch Love, an assistant in Washington, Jay Leach, and Jay Woodcroft. He had been the head coach of the Ontario Reign for 3 seasons after serving as the Kings assistant 4 years before that. And he's also a Bruins alumni, having played 5 seasons with the Bruins between 2005 and 2010. These are interesting hires because these are both clubs missed the playoffs and missed them badly, and they're going for first-time NHL head coaches. Thoughts?
I think the Bruins love to hire their alumni. You got Cam Neely as president, Don Sweeney as the general manager, who just got extended, by the way. And now you've got a Bruins alumni and Marco Sturm is the coach. So we'll see where they can go. They got some rebuilding to do in Boston, as we all know. Just a couple of years shy of a record-setting season. They'll find themselves in a place where they've got to really overhaul their roster. And Pittsburgh, who knows what they were going to do? Like, I don't know Dan Muse. I've seen him behind the bench. I understand that he's good with young players, or that's what I've been told. That would fit with what the Penguins should be doing, which is putting some young players into the lineup, although I wonder if that's to the chagrin of the people like Crosby, Malkin, Carlson, and Letang, who are not exactly young players and would probably like to see a playoff game or two before they retire. So we'll see how Dan Muse can do with it. It's a situation where you're going to try to, do better than they did last year. Mm-hmm. But there's a lot of downside for a guy to go in and coach that team too, because is there a really legitimate chance for them to make the playoffs next year? Sort of like when David Quinn went to San Jose. He took that job. It was almost dead man walking from the first day because he had no hope. And then he ends up getting fired doing the job that everybody expected could be done, which was miss the playoffs. The poor guy didn't have a chance. And I'm not sure that Dan Muse has much of a chance this year coming up. But I will say, if he can get this tired Penguins team into the playoffs, I'll give him all the credit in the world. But I don't think you can. But that's why we play the games.
I heard clips from another podcast, and they were questioning this hire in that coaches have certain vibes when they walk into a room, and they see Muse behind the bench. They see his carriage. And to quote that podcast, they wondered whether or not he has the chops to actually give that vibe in the room. And, of course, you're looking at 2, possibly 3 Hall of Famers there. I mean, Crosby and Malkin definitely getting in. and Letang maybe a possibility at some point. And can he capture that room? The other side of this is that the club hasn't made the playoffs in the last 3 years, and they are long removed from their back-to-back cups in 2016 and 2017. This team is clearly in rebuild mode. So what do they really have to lose by making this hire, meaning Kyle Dubas?
Right. And when you talk about when a coach walks in the room, the commissioner of the NBA is Adam Silver, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, this would be like Adam Silver walking behind the bench of the Penguins. That's the carriage you're going to see, because that's exactly what he looks like. He looks like Adam Silver. Nothing wrong with that. But just to give you a visual, that's what it looks like. But not your typical grizzled old hockey coach. This is not Craig Berube.
Right.
So we'll see. I mean, I can't figure them out. And by the way, you talk about Hall of Famers. The one guy that's getting in the Hall of Fame for sure, you didn't mention, is Erik Karlsson. Whether we like him or we don't like him, he's won how many Norris trophies?
You think he's going to be there at the start of the season?
Going to be in Pittsburgh? I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know whether he will or not. That's not my point. But you said they've got, two for sure Hall of Famers, and one that's, Letang is probably because of his Stanley Cups and that. But I'm going to tell you that Karlsson's going in the Hockey Hall of Fame because of his Norris trophies. Whether you like him or not as a defenseman, and whether you are not aware of the fact that all the teams that he's played for pretty much missed the playoffs.
Yeah.
But because of those Norris trophies and because of those amazing amount of points that he's put up on the board for non-playoff teams, he will end up in the Hall of Fame. Do you agree?
I think he's borderline.
Yeah.
But that's my opinion. And several years.
Well, where we need to do our research, and you guys out there can do it for us, is how many multiple Norris Trophy winners are not in the Hall of Fame?
No, I think you and I can do that. But
we can. Yeah. We can, but why not engage with the listeners and have them tell us whether or not Erik Karlsson should be in the Hall of Fame? And if so, why?
Send cards and letters to Neil at NHLWraparound.com. We have 5 re-signings to catch everybody up on. Brock Nelson signs with the Avalanche, 3 years, $22.5 million. That's a $7.5 million AAV. Yanni Gourde re-signs for 6 years with Tampa, $14 million, $2.33 million AAV. That includes a signing bonus and a full no-trade clause in this deal. He turns 34 in mid-December. I think the money is great for the Lightning in this signing by Julien Brisebois. I was a little bit surprised at the term.
But from what I understand from people around the league, if you want a 3-year deal at 4.66, you're going to have to take a 6-year deal at 2.33. And we know you probably won't play those last few years, and we'll have to carry them on the cap. But that's the way we're going to do it, because we're not going to use that much cap money right now on you. I'm not saying that's what's happened here, but Julien Brisebois wouldn't sign Yanni Gourde to play going 39-40
right
in his last year. So you got to think that was some of the thought process into it, and a full no trade. So when he's 38 years old, you can't trade him. It doesn't seem logical to me. So I think there's got to be something understood in there.
But for the player to have that long-term security to ride out his career, that's not a bad thing.
Oh, it's a fabulous thing. I wish we had that on NHL Wraparound.
No, we don't. All we have are 3 more signings to report. Noah Cates, a forward for the Flyers, signs a 4-year extension for $16 million, and an average of $4 million per year. Derek Forbort re-ups with the Canucks, 1 year at $2 million. And Marcus Johansson, forward for the Minnesota Wild, stays with the club, 1 year, $800,000, 983 career games with 6 teams He was the 24th overall pick by the Caps in 2009. Had 11 goals and 23 assists in 72 games with the Wild last season. You have some breaking news that has just crossed.
I do. And the Bill Masterton Trophy, which honors the player who best exemplifies the qualities of perseverance, sportsmanship, and dedication to hockey, has been announced. And while many of us thought that Gabriel Landeskog was a shoo-in to win that because of his amazing comeback that he made this year with the Colorado Avalanche, probably the man who should have won it did win it, and that's Sean Monahan of the Columbus Blue Jackets. Sean Monahan had said early in the season that his only goal for his own personal play this season was to honor his best friend, Johnny Gaudreau. Well, today, Meredith Gaudreau, Johnny's wife, presented Sean Monahan with the Bill Masterton Trophy, and couldn't be any more fitting than that, even though Marc-Andre Fleury and Gabriel Landeskog were very, very high-quality candidates for that trophy as well.
Absolutely a great story. Maestro!
This day in Stanley Cup history.
We turn the clock back 21 years to 2004 when the Tampa Bay Lightning beat the Calgary Flames 3-2 in double overtime of Game 6 of the Stanley Cup Final. Brad Richards had a pair of power play goals for the Lightning in the second period. The game was scoreless in the third period, scoreless through the first overtime, and then just 33 seconds into the second OT, Martin St. Louis forces Game 7, converting on a rebound, and of course the Lightning would go on to win Game 7 2-1. But if you look back, and if you remember this, how close the Lightning actually came to losing this game with just under 7 minutes left in regulation. A centering feed caromed off the skate of Martin Jelena, who's charging the net. Nikolai Habibulin got his pad out, and it appeared that the puck may have gone over the goal line, and replay was in effect, but the overhead at that time was blocked by the crossbar, so you couldn't see it.
I was at that game. This was in Calgary.
Yes.
And not only would the Tampa Bay Lightning have lost the game, Calgary would have won the Stanley Cup that night on that goal. That would be a Stanley Cup in Canada only 11 years after Montreal had won in 93. So we wouldn't be talking about 31 years since a cup has been won in Canada. The Calgary Flames would be the Stanley Cup champs. The goal didn't count, and everybody would fly back to Tampa Bay, where Tampa Bay would win Game 7, much because of the brilliance of Vincent Lecavalier, and he was brilliant in that game. And Tampa Bay, John Tortorella and crew won their very first Stanley Cup.
Remember, he also had a fight with Jerome McGinley in that series.
That was a heck of a scrap.
It's pretty good. Pretty good. I got a couple stories coming from that, but the first goes back to that goal that did not count. ESPN did a animation of whether or not that puck actually went in, and admittedly not as high-tech as the things that we see today, but the puck was on edge, and they created this animation, and I remember getting called into one of our production trucks to actually look at this, and it clearly did show that with the puck standing on edge, that it never crossed the goal line. So indeed, if you're taking that into account, the correct call was made by not allowing that potential goal to stand.
And the reason that it was called that way, though, was because it was inconclusive, correct? The call on the ice stood, which was no goal.
And this animation just substantiated the correctness of that call. The other story there was that you had mentioned that after Game 6, everybody was heading back to Tampa for Game number 7. And if you remember, on this date, this was the same day that Ronald Reagan had passed away. And there was actually some debate as to whether or not ABC was going to be able to start the telecast on time because of coverage for the late president. It was still the ESPN crew that was producing those games, but it was aired on ABC. And in anticipation of the Flames winning the Stanley Cup, we knew that there was no way anybody was going to get through the Red Mile that night had the Flames won the Stanley Cup. And so I think everybody was getting ready to have their wrap party in the compound that evening. And somebody had made mention to the fact that Reagan had passed and what a tragedy. And at that moment, one of the technical guys was coming in with a case full of Molson bottles of beer and dropped it. And all of the bottles broke. And they said, Reagan, a tragedy? No. The breaking of the bottles of beer, that's a tragedy.
Yeah, especially Molson beer. When you're up there in Canada, that would be a tragedy. And I can see a 2-4, as we call them up there, guy carrying a 2-4 and dropping it and then breaking. That is a tragedy.
Neil and I will return on Friday because there was a lot of news surrounding Gary Bettman and his State of the State address, and we wanted to catch you up on several of the items that were brought up in a press conference, him sitting alongside NHLPA Director Marty Walsh. We'll also preview game number 2 of the Stanley Cup Final between the Panthers and the Edmonton Oilers. And we're also going to talk a little bit of AI, which TNT employed during their open for game 1. And Rogers up in Canada taking a little bit of heat for something that appeared on social media. So please join us then and have a great day.